Thank you, Christine. And also, I'd like to thank the Minister for his attendance here today, for his presentation, and of course for his advocacy of the sector and his work to improve the package and the funding measures for what is a very important sector in this country. Students often ask me, why can't we return to the days of free education? It's a good question. But of course the answer is simple. Education's never been free. Of course it's not free. Our tutors, our professors, our lecturers, we pay them all. We have to keep up the buildings and the facilities and so forth that we deliver our education in. We've got to stock our library, albeit digitally these days. So education has never been free. Someone has to pay. When I went to university, I'm of that generation, like many people in this room, who didn't pay fees. When I went to university, my fees were paid by the taxpayer. When I went to university in the UK, the basic rate of income tax was 35%. The marginal rate, the top rate, was 83% in the UK. If you had investment income, the top rate was 98%. That's a rather different world to the one that we live in today. What we have now in the UK and in Australia, of course, is a shared costing of education, where the taxpayers make a contribution and the students make a contribution through a debt paid up front by the government in a very generous scheme, and then repaid by way of an income contingent loan. Now, probably many of the graduates in this room would prefer to pay back the value of an income contingent loan up to a fixed quantum than pay 98% in marginal tax. Of course, that was not entirely the cost of higher education. But we are in a much lower tax environment. And in that environment, there is a strong case for sharing the cost of education between the student and the taxpayer. Why? Well, of course, it's because the student benefits from the opportunities of education. They benefit from the career prospects, the enhanced career prospects that are available to them. But society also benefits. The taxpayers benefit. We get the graduates that, frankly, we need. We need the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare professionals, the engineers, the scientists, the teachers, the business people. It goes on and on. These are the people that are required to provide our first world economy. But of course, their combined education enriches our society. Now, it's arguable whether it's the graduate or society that benefits most. It's therefore arguable who ought to pay most. And the Minister has previously indicated that the appropriate balance, in his view, would be 50-50. Now, the current split is 58% taxpayer, 42% the student. And as Mike has mentioned, that means that our students in Australia are paying among the highest fees for their education, university education, of any country in the world. The proposed changes will bring those numbers closer together. They don't yet achieve that 50-50 target, and one wonders if that foreshadows further cuts in the future. But these proposals change not just the balance, they also change the quantum of funding, as we've heard. They would reduce government funding to universities by a minimum of $2.8 billion a year, representing a 10.5% saving to government. Students will pay 7.5% more, as we've heard, but this restores only half of that cut, and so there's an efficiency dividend levied against the universities. Now, some of the arguments for that efficiency dividend, to justify that efficiency dividend, I'm afraid I would take issue with. As we already heard from David, universities very frequently will target an approximately 5% surplus for financial sustainability reasons, as he's very eloquently explained. So I won't labour that point. But what do we do with our surpluses? David's also told you. We use those surpluses to invest, and to invest in the future, in buildings, in infrastructure, in curriculum innovation, in improving the student experience for the students in our institutions. David kindly referred to the Tonsley facility that Flinders funded, and sadly we didn't get 40 million of Commonwealth funding for our building. We built it all ourselves. We also built our new student hub on the campus, all ourselves. Another $65 million worth of investment that has increased the competitiveness of Flinders University internationally, created jobs, as we've heard, here in South Australia, and has improved our prospects, our capacity to compete as an institution. That Tonsley facility embodies what this institution, Flinders, is doing in the innovation space. It's the embodiment of our interface with business, where we are in using our facilities and intellectual capabilities to improve business and help businesses grow. And our work there has already led to the creation of more than 200 startup companies. This is not what universities used to do. These are the things that universities are now investing in the future that will help to build our economy, not just here in South Australia, but in the country broadly. These investments, as I've said, are keeping us competitive. Flinders is increasingly competitive in the international space. We are growing in terms of attracting international students faster than the national average, 3 times the average rate here in South Australia. This is important to us. It's important to us as a state, as a city, as a state, and as a country. Generating those surpluses, as I've mentioned, requires that we are ever more efficient every year. Universities are not stuck in the past. I think that, as we've also heard from Mike, we are some of the most innovative and forward-thinking institutions I think that this country has. And make no mistake, the Australian higher education sector is a huge success. Half of our institutions are in the world's top 500. All of the IRU institutions are in the top 500. And we are, collectively, the 3rd biggest export earner in this country. All of this has been achieved despite the fact that government investment in the university sector is the 2nd lowest in the OECD. That makes us remarkably efficient and exceptional value for money. So we come back to the balance. Students will pay more, taxpayers will contribute less, and university funding will be cut. Universities will have less to fund infrastructure. There will be inevitably job losses, fewer staff in teaching and support roles, and students are therefore being asked to pay more for less. And I and my IRU colleagues don't support that. Finally, in the proposed legislation, there are a number of stalking horses in there. Some of them are very technical. They're of interest probably to Vice Chancellors and policy wonks. So I won't bore you with all of those details, but I'd be delighted to have the opportunity to discuss with the Minister in more detail. One of them is that performance-related component, the 7.5% that has been mentioned already, which is being proposed as a contingent fund for performance of the Australian sector. Now, I'm all for accountability, but the sector's already accountable. So what's the performance issue that we're trying to fix? The government owns the QILT website, the Quality in Learning and Teaching website, that bears witness to the incredible quality of provision across our sector. There's a national regulator, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, TEQSA, who is specifically tasked to monitor and maintain the quality and standards of the Australian higher education sector. So is TEQSA failing in its role? If not, why do we need some more Canberra bureaucracy in order to add another layer of accountability around that funding? It's interesting that were any given institution to fail against whatever that future metric might be, and we don't entirely know. We've heard what the first year's metric might be. We don't know what the subsequent years would be. But any institution losing that 7.5% would combine with the 10.5% government cuts to constitute what would then be actually an 18% cut in government funding to that institution. That's a remarkable cut. It's interestingly not very different to the 20% in the original proposals from the former Minister, Christopher Pyne. Now, we're told that 7.5% performance fund is not a savings measure, and clearly that fund, it's intended that it would stay within the sector, and yet try telling that to the students of any university that loses it. In closing, I would just reiterate that our country needs to compete in a rapidly changing, globalized, very high-tech knowledge economy. And higher education is a vital preparation for that. The future of this country is in the hands of our young people. We shouldn't shortchange them. We need to invest in education. I believe that our young people deserve it, and I believe that the future success of our economy depends upon it. Thank you.